I'm going to tell you exactly why the Falcons should be paying Bijan sooner versus later.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Locked On Falcons, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network in the galaxy. I, of course, am your humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Sirius Black. Been covering the Falcons for 2 decades, formerly at FalcFans.com. RIP, still going strong here on Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. And on today's daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, we're going to break down some of the RB2 replacement options for Tyler Allgeier in free agency that have connections with this coaching staff, which will potentially lead to a possible Nick Chubb homecoming potentially on the horizon. But more than likely, the RB2 will be found in the draft due to the need to offset the cost of Bijan's big contract extension that is looming on the horizon. But I'll give exactly the reason why I think the Falcons would be smart to pay Bijan in the calendar year of 2026 as opposed to waiting until 2027. Now, we are operating here on Locked On Falcons under the assumption that Tyler Allgeier will depart in free agency at some point next week. It's certainly a possibility that he returns, but I don't think it makes a ton of sense for the Falcons to pay Allgeier potentially top of the RB2 market, which is what some of the projections are suggesting, $7 million, $8 million range. And when you're going to pay Bijan top of the RB1 market, which is going to be north of $20 million at some point in time. And in a bit, we'll explain exactly why I think the Falcons should pay Bijan now versus later. But it has little to do with lowering costs when it comes to saving money on Bijan's contract. I've explained before, I think people make a bigger deal than they need to about trying to pinch pennies on big contracts. Really, where you try to pinch pennies as an organization is on the middle class contracts, and that's going to be exactly where Tyler Allgeier firmly lives on his next contract. That $4 to $10 million range is typically the middle class in the NFL. You could maybe push it to 12 now with the $300 million salary cap. But, I think it makes a ton of sense given how much Bijan is going to cost that you offset that with the cheapest possible running back option in terms of backup, and that's going to come in the draft. I think I would expect the Falcons are going to use a day 3 draft pick on a running back. It's just a question of when, do they try to get ahead of the run and take that guy in round 4, or do they sort of pick and choose their spot somewhere in round 5, 6 or something like that? We're obviously, again, making another assumption. And again, we'll maybe looking silly at the end of the offseason making a lot of these assumptions. But we're also making the assumption that the Falcons will acquire more day 3 picks with some trade backs under new general manager Ian Cunningham. Ian has essentially promised us that he is going to do that, and we're gonna hold Ian to that promise. But it gets to the question: why should the Falcons pay Bijan now? And it doesn't really have much to do with saving money, like, oh, it'll be cheaper to sign him now versus waiting where the price could go up. And like, that's true. But like, as I said, 21 million versus 23 million. It's like, all right, man, who cares? But it's really about guaranteed money. And typically with running back contracts, a lot of running backs only get the first 2 years guaranteed of their contract. While it's typical when guys sign big contracts that they get 3 years guaranteed on other positions, but it's just the nature of running backs and teams not valuing the running back as much that they only often guarantee 2 years. There are some guys that get like a third year that is like guaranteed if he's on the date at a certain time. Like I think James Cook's contract is structured like that, where it's like partially guaranteed in the third year. And then if he's still on the team going into that third season, it'll be fully guaranteed. But, Bijan, because of the expected size of the contract, I'm fully expecting the Falcons to guarantee 3 years. And basically, if you sign him this offseason, those 3 guarantee years will be the 2026 season, 2027 season, and 2028 season. And that would mean that the guaranteed money would run out in 2029. And in 2029, Bijan is set to be 27 years old, right? And then at that point, you get some cap flexibility. You'd be in a position, in theory, to give him potentially a third contract if you feel like he's worthy at that point in time, or you just kind of let things run its course and you start looking for life after Bijan and start preparing for life after Bijan, and we'll see if that's the case. But that age 27 number is notable because 27, 28 is usually the age where lots of people like to say, oh, this is where running backs hit a cliff, right? That's usually where guys start to fall off. And basically, if you wait till 2027, if you wait till after the 2026 season to give Bijan his contract extension, which is the norm that the Falcons have typically done, and most teams typically do, is that they wait until the fourth year, after the fourth year of a player's career, rather than paying them after the third year. The Eagles typically like to pay guys after the third year, and we'll see if the Falcons are willing to change that precedent for Bijan specifically, and I think they should. That if they wait till 2027 to give Bijan his contract extension, then the guaranteed 3 years on that deal are going to run through his age 27 season, and you really potentially set yourself up for similar to what the Falcons had, and it's a different player, I know, but like it's a similar situation with Devontae Freeman, right? Where Devontae Freeman started to get nicked up at like 26, 27. And I think age 27 in that 2019 season was his last year in Atlanta, if I'm not mistaken. And he was never the same player after he got injured in 2018. But, I say that because, again, I don't think it's really about saving money. You can spin it that way, but it's really about having the financial flexibility when you get to a point in Bijan's career where it's reasonable to expect some decline, and you have the flexibility to do whatever you need to do, whether that's move off of Bijan, whether that's, try to keep Bijan, whatever, you just want to have that flexibility is really where that to me is more valuable than, the $2 million that you may in theory save by signing him, this year versus next year or whatever. But that's how I sort of view it. The question I think is going to be fascinating when it comes to paying guys like Bijan and Drake London, that is, this season, potentially, is how aggressive will the new decision makers in Atlanta be with extending guys that in theory they should want to extend. I feel like you just have to watch maybe a few hours of film, maybe not a few minutes, but a few hours of film, maybe a few minutes for Bijan, but a few hours of film of both of these guys and be like, yeah, these are definitely guys we want to build our offense around. And so there's no reason to not want to extend them. But, you go back to Ian Cunningham's time in Chicago. I could be wrong. I have to do some more research on this, but I don't recall Ryan Poles extending anybody in that first year that he was on the job with Ian Cunningham, right? That was where the Roquan stuff went down, where they were like, we don't think we should pay a linebacker $100 million. And so they traded Roquan to the Ravens that season. And then they went out and signed Tremaine Edmonds, and we're like, we'll pay a linebacker $70 million, and then I think they extended Cole Kmet, and then, they started extending more guys starting in 23 and then 24 and whatnot. And so I wonder, will we see a similar situation where they're going to be kind of a little hesitant to give out big contracts to even guys like Bijan and Drake this offseason, and may just wait to, training camp? Maybe they wait during the season, right? That's also a possibility where they're like, we just want to see a couple of games first before we hand out big contracts, and then we'll get some deals done in like October, November, or whatever the case may be. So that may be something that they wind up doing. So we'll see if Ian Cunningham, how aggressive he's going to be when it comes to extending these guys. But to me, that's the case. Ian, if you're watching, this is the reason why you should do it now versus later. But we'll see on that front. But, we'll talk more about some free agent options that the Falcons can find out there that potentially could replace Tyler Allgeier, including, a potential homecoming for our guy, Nick Chubb. And we'll do that as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. March is a time to celebrate women, especially on upcoming International Women's Day. And we recognize just how much women carry at work and relationships and families. It's all in the unseen roles that they step into every single day. And it's easy to celebrate that strength, but it's just as important to make space for their emotional well-being. And honestly, that goes for all of us, right? I think about my mom and, all the things she had to carry raising 3 boys, and it makes me think about all the things that I have to carry, right? The various roles we play, the expectations we carry, the pressure that we don't always talk about, things that she always had to deal with throughout her life. And therapy can help us with all of that, creating balance, setting healthy boundaries, and supporting our overall well-being. With over 30,000 licensed therapists and more than 6 million people served worldwide, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, and it works. Fill out a short questionnaire. You get matched with a licensed therapist quickly. And if it's not the right fit, you can switch at any time. So your emotional well-being matters. Find support and feel lighter in therapy by signing up and getting 10% off at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's betterhelp.com/lockedon.
Hey, it's Matt Derry from the Locked On Lions podcast. The people I love depend on me. If I'm gone, the financial responsibilities don't disappear. I didn't want my family figuring things out during the hardest moment of their lives. That's why I knew only one place to go. I chose life insurance through my friends at Ethos. Ethos makes getting life insurance fast and easy, 100% online. You can get a quote in seconds, apply in minutes, and get same-day coverage. There's no medical exam. You just answer a few simple health questions. You can get up to $3 million in coverage. Some policies are as low as $30 a month. I love the folks at Ethos. Protect your family with life insurance from Ethos now by going to ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. In as little as 10 minutes, you can get the free quote and up to $3 million in coverage at ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. That is ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. Ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. Application times and rates may vary.
So we're talking about some free agent options, and we're not going to mention any of the bigger names just because, similar to the conversation we had about drafting RB2, because of the cost, we're looking mostly at under the radar guys that are going to be bottom of the barrel when it comes to costs. And so you're not going to hear me talk about like Isaiah Pacheco or Kenneth Gainwell or Aaron Jones or J.K. Dobbins or even Kareem Hunt. All very good RB2 options, but I don't expect those guys to be cheap, right? And basically everybody that we're going to talk about today on the remainder of the show, I expect, and maybe I'm wrong in this assessment, I expect is going to be like $2 million or less, that you can get them on like a 1 year, $2 million contract, right? And be that placeholder RB2 until the draft, and then, and whatnot. And the player we got to start off with is, of course, none other than Nick Chubb, who is going to be 30 this upcoming season, but it's the potential homecoming for Nick Chubb. And the reason why you would potentially bring Nick Chubb into the room is for that veteran leadership. It's a good presence to have in the room. He still showed he has something left in the tank last year in Houston. And if you draft a running back, he would be a great mentor for that year that he would be in that room. And obviously, some of the things that Nick Chubb can do also can rub off on Bijan Robinson. You've already heard, or maybe you didn't hear this, but, Kevin Stefanski spoke highly of Nick Chubb in a recent interview with, I think, AtlantaFalcons.com, talking about he checks all the boxes that you want when it comes to the running back position. And, the challenge with Nick Chubb is, he doesn't add a ton of value in the passing game as a pass catcher or on special teams. And so if you do sign Nick Chubb, you're going to have to go out there and get a running back that does bring value in at least one of those areas, right? Particularly the passing game. You could probably get away with the special team stuff, although we'll talk about a couple of guys that could come in, in addition, if you want to get that two-headed monster in free agency with the special teams options. Now, to me, where I think if the Falcons aren't going for a Nick Chubb, where they can get the most potential bang for their buck is one of these reclamation projects. And for me, that's Jerome Ford, that's Antonio Gibson, that's Khalil Herbert. Ford obviously played under Stefanski in Cleveland. Gibson played in New England when Alex Van Pelt was the OC there 2 years ago, and obviously is coming off ACL injury, but he's a Georgia native, 1,000-yard rusher back in 2021 before losing his job to Brian Robinson. But he's expected to be clear, recovering from that ACL injury, by the time training camp rolls around, and is obviously a very good pass catcher, right? That's really what he brings to the table. So you can offset that. Khalil Herbert is another one, played under Falcons running backs coach Michael Petrie in Chicago. Obviously was there when Ian Cunningham was there. And then this past year played with the Jets when Tanner Engstrom was the OC there. The Bears traded him back in 2024, and he's basically been on like 4 teams since that trade happened about roughly 18 months ago. And so he needs a stable environment. But, Ford, I think, is probably the name of this group. He was kind of being groomed to be the Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt heir apparent in Cleveland several years ago. Then this year lost favor for those rookies, Quinshon Judkins and Dylan Sampson, and was stuck as the RB3. But he has proven value as an RB2. But I think of these 3 guys, Ford is probably going to have the more robust market. So if you're trying to get under market value, Gibson and I think Herbert would be the way to go, just because I think, Gibson coming off the injury and the fact that Herbert has basically turned into a journeyman means that they're less likely to be at the top of anybody's wish list. While I do think in researching this, I already saw a couple of articles basically saying like, oh, this team should sign Jerome Ford in free agency to be their RB2 or whatever. And so, you'll have competition for that. And so that could drive up his price. So you may not get a bottom of the basement player. Now, we'll wrap up talking about, 7 special teams contributors, or at least, 6 of those 7. I don't feel compelled to talk too much about Craig Reynolds at this point in time. But, I think guys like Hassan Haskins, who played in Tennessee, and Julius Chestnut, who played in Tennessee. Obviously, you have Bill Callahan these last 2 years with Chestnut working there, and then Craig Ackerman being the special teams coach. And really what Haskins and Chestnut have majored in has been special teams ability, right? They're both bigger backs, so they do bring a little bit of that skill set that you're potentially losing with Tyler Allgeier. And so, Chestnut is particularly interesting. He's the youngest of this group. He's only going to be 25. He's basically the most productive preseason running back other than Emmanuel Wilson of the Packers over the last 4 years, right? I think he's got the most yards from scrimmage amongst any running back combined over the last 4 years in the preseason. So he's a preseason superstar, also contributes on special teams, is like 228 and whatnot, and so can bring a little bit of juice there and power there. Travis Homer is a special teams favorite, spent the last 3 years playing purely as a special teams guy in Chicago. Kene Nwangu is basically the modern day Cordero Patterson, is basically the best kickoff returner in the NFL the last 3 to 5 years, and played in New York with Ingstrin, and certainly would provide a big boost to your kickoff return game if you were able to sign him. Travion Williams is another RB3 special teams guy. Ronnie Rivers is a similar one with the Rams. Williams was most recently with the with the Browns this past year, and Rivers was with the Rams when Alex Van Pelt was there. Basically Rivers is only getting run season finales when the Rams are resting their players the last couple of years, and generally has looked good in those games. He's a more undersized guy, so would certainly be a different type of runner than what Allgeier is. And so I think those are options for the Falcons if they go in that direction. Again, I think the draft is probably likely, but if you just want to get a body in the room in March, it makes sense to sign one or more of these guys, especially, one thing about Allgeier that's underrated is that he was a regular contributor on special teams over the last 4 years. And so that's why we're listing some of these guys that are special teams guys, just because you are losing something in addition to the rushing ability that Allgeier, you are also losing a valuable contributor on special teams. And so you may want to wind up replacing that. That was a big issue this past year with Nathan Carter, who was the RB3, because Nathan Carter wasn't as valuable on special teams like an Avery Williams. You did lose something when it came to your special teams, and we all know that special teams was a disaster. Not blaming that all on Nathan Carter or anything like that, but I certainly think that did not help by not having a solid special teams contributor at the RB3 spot. So those are my thoughts on the running back position in terms of the free agents. Tomorrow we should get into the Kyler Murray of it all, and also get into some linebacker free agent breakdowns and sort of who are some top of the market guys that if the Falcons don't want to spend on Caden Ellis, they can spend on somebody else, and some mid-tier guys if they want to save a little bit of money rather than paying Caden Ellis, who might give them the best bang for their buck. So that's in store for you on our next episode. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. Check us out on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Check out Locked On NFL, Locked On NFL Draft as your second listens. And of course, check out the Everydayer Club to continue the discussion all off season, get an ad-free version of the show. And you can get your month free by using the code free agency with no spaces. So go check it out in the link in the description below at lockedonfalcons.supercast.com. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.